Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis, as we say, looking for the best of the best around the whole globe. Even though we really focus on 144 different nations, we're actually reaching into, through the Emerald Planet TV, into all 214 countries and territories to find what really needs to be done, what needs to be used, and how to make it available to people around the globe. And I have a gentleman sitting right beside me who is with us actually on a fairly regular basis, I must say. Lynn, this is Dr. Linton. He goes by Lynn Wells II, Executive Advisor, C4I, and the Cyber Center at the Volcano School of Engineering at George Mason University, and also as a managing partner of Wells Analytics. And Lynn, welcome back.
Good to be back, Sam.
It's always good to have you here. And how we really met initially was through what was then called Star Tides, and then Tides, and now it's back to Star Tides and Tides. And tell us a little bit about these two. And then, since we've known each other now for quite a number of years, I want to talk about the kinds of things that you really see for beyond the horizon that's coming out of this, and also the collaboration with USAID and their global initiatives as well.
So TIDES is the U.S. Defense Department program. It stands for Transformative Innovation for Development and Emergency Support. It supports four mission areas of the Department of Defense: building the capacity of partner nations, domestic and foreign disaster relief, and peacekeeping and stability operations. It's only about knowledge sharing. It doesn't bend metal. It doesn't pick winners and losers among companies. And because of that, our General Counsel said we can have a network, startides.net, with which we can talk to most anybody about anything. So by now, the Star Tides network has grown to several thousand members, and as the graphic shows, and people can see it there, they're in universities in Asia, they're NGOs in Europe and Africa. It's got the Red Cross, it has U.S. Marine Corps, so it's public-private, whole-of-government, transnational. Again, just about information sharing.
Now, looking at this is something that came out of a mutual friend of ours who's not with us in this program, but Jim Kraft came to you with this idea and said, this is something that I think we really ought to be doing. And of course, this thing has just blossomed. It's just absolutely amazing, the work that you've done with this through National Defense University. So what was that intriguing hook? Because many times senior administrators, which you were, could just say dismiss it out of hand, or say, no, we're too busy, I don't have enough time. But yet you actually actively embrace this Tides and Star Tides, and you've really gone 3 and 4 steps beyond anything that I think anybody would ever imagine.
So a couple things. So Jim's idea, and Jim, the thing I admire about Jim, he's someone who walks the walk. He had been the information communications technology advisor in Afghanistan. And while he was there, he observed the need for integration of some of the technologies which have turned into Tides. I had at that point spent several years in relatively senior positions in the Office of Secretary of Defense, mostly in information communications technology. And one of the things I got extremely frustrated about was you get very channelized, even at senior levels. So you're the IT person. Why are you worried about water? Why are you worried about shelter? Why are you worried about power? Things like that. And so I said, if I ever got someplace where I could do cross-cutting work, I'd like to do it. Well, National Defense University, which I transitioned to shortly after Jim brought me the idea, and by the way, he then transitioned back into government, so he couldn't do it from his position, so it was a good opportunity, was a perfect place to do that, because you can sort of tie all these things together, and if somebody questions, you plead fuzzy as academic, and I didn't know I couldn't do that, and so go on.
Beg forgiveness instead of asking permission.
Yeah. So it was the integrating ability at NDU. The basic question of Star Tides, as it turned out, was how do people die? So 6 ways: too hot, too cold, hunger, thirst, illness, injury.
But it's interesting. I want to stop you there for a minute. I've heard this from you a number of times, and usually everybody's trying to think about how do we sustain, all these other things. But you actually really started at, which is really the awakening moment, is how do people die, and then backing into it. So what kind of insight does that give you that's different, that's special, that allowed the Tides and Star Tides to now expand all over the planet, and you've got thousands of organizations but thousands of others wanting to be in the network?
Well, so I have the concept is really from a British friend, Vinay Gupta, about the 6 ways people die. And the point is that too hot, too cold is a shelter, heating, and cooling problem. Hunger and thirst is a supply chain problem. And illness, injury is a problem of public safety, security, public health. So we started looking at infrastructures that supported those. And after some, it's evolved over time, but where it is now is 10 infrastructures. So power, shelter, and water, the integration of combustion and solar cooking for places like Darfur, Haiti, Afghanistan that are deforested, the heating, cooling, sanitation, lighting, lots of information and communication technologies, life support and logistics. So those kind of cover the 6 questions. And the question then was, how do you combine the knowledge in the global StarTides network with an approach that integrates these different infrastructures? So how would you position the water so it doesn't affect the sanitation? How would you use the heat from the cooking to pasteurize the water? Maybe heat rocks and bricks to put in shelters, so you don't have fires in enclosed spaces, things like that. So the idea of integrated thinking. And then the last piece, because the missionaries we're looking at, we're interested in solutions that work for local populations in their worlds with their resources. Not interested in a bright, shiny American solution that's inoperative after you deploy it. So how do you find something that can be sustained by a local population without relying on World Bank or USAID loans forever? So those are kind of the underlying points. And the last is that no lesson is ever learned until behavior changes. Typhoon comes by, you observe a lesson. Next typhoon, you re-observe the same lesson. So how do you train, educate, exercise, and provide incentives to cause people to do things differently so you can really say, we've learned that lesson rather than just observed another one?
I want to let you I love the way you're taking off on this. Is fantastic. But I want to kind of branch off from this. Looking at the water food, you talked about this as a supply chain issue.
Right.
But I think most people in the NGOs and the development community will say, no, we're not producing enough, we don't have enough food, we're producing too many children, so it's really a population issue and all that. When you look at statistics, they're saying we're already producing enough food for maybe 13 to 14 billion people on the planet, but we're just wasting half of it. So this really kind of circles back to your whole notion of the supply chain. Looking at that, one factoid there, how does that relate to all these different areas that we're talking about so that we're using the resources and we're employing the people in the most strategic, sustainable, resilient manner possible, because it looks like we're wasting tremendous amount of energy and resources and allowing people to live less than they should be living.
So let me take you to a place we haven't talked about before. I teach a course at NDU, co-teach, on something called wicked problems. And a wicked problem is an area where there's no agreement on the definition of the problem, much less on the solution. One of the things we've been looking at in this is the replacement of labor by automation and artificial intelligence, and the national security implications of that over between now and 2030. And the question is not so much the developed world, that's a problem, but what happens in the youth bulge areas of sub-Saharan Africa, the Islamic world, and South Asia if there are no entry-level jobs, and so no stake in the international system, so what can you do to reduce pressures for migration and radicalization by focusing on the development of local, economically viable and resilient communities that are culturally acceptable and want people to stay and not migrate. So the project is called Brocade, Building Resilient Opportunities in Culturally Aware, Diverse Environments.
I love your acronym. It's always an acronym, but give it to us one more time.
Brocade, Building Resilient Opportunities, Culturally Aware, Diverse Environments.
Okay.
And the focus is on using the sharing economy, peering economy approaches applied in local communities with the platforms of StarTides. So there's a lady named Robin Chase, who has written a book called Peers, Inc. Robin's the co-founder of Zipcar, so she has some credibility in this space. And in this Peers, Inc., the inks are the industrial level platforms like Google search engines and the internet, that peers, individuals, can use to innovate and develop ideas. So this is how Airbnb builds out 650,000 beds in 4 years. Okay? So could you take this in local communities? Maasai may still want to hunt lions. Some people want to do this under Sharia law. But you look at the explosion of innovation in urban agriculture, for example. You look at local production through 3D printing, that kind of thing. I don't know which will succeed, the high-altitude balloons or the satellites, the drones. There's going to be 4G global internet in the next 5-10 years.
Right.
That brings with it learning, telemedicine, but it also brings the ability of, with the vocal interfaces, oral interfaces, for illiterate populations around the world to engage in the knowledge of the world.
Yeah, because they're doing it by voice, they're doing it by image. They don't just have to necessarily be, reading literate in order to be able to participate.
So you can put together about 12 of these different platforms in Robbins, apply them to local communities, use the Star Tides ideas, and that would be how I try to get to the point about how do you build economically viable, resilient, culturally acceptable communities that would reduce some of these pressures.
Now, looking at this, we've absolutely, anytime we get together, we always run out of time. But looking at this in about 30 to 40 seconds, how do you think this is going to be implemented, say, over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
So we're actually kicking off with a conference on this next month at George Mason. And the first thing is governance. How do you determine what's justice, what's fairness? How would you manage these in the different communities? Then what would be some pilots? And then the question, how do you tie the technologies into those communities? That's the second part.
That's fantastic. Thank you for being here. We've got a few more seconds to go on, but I really appreciate you being here and sharing these outstanding people that you brought with you.
I'm so glad.
And then introducing us to Jim Kraft. He's absolutely a fantastic guy. And what you're doing is just going beyond the pale, and I think this Tides and Star Tides, even though I was introduced to about 6 years ago, it just keeps growing and it's more wonderful than ever. So it's just really nicely done.